You know how to interpret the appearance of earth and sky, but why do you not know how to interpret the present time? Present time, let alone this scripture. I really don't like this scripture at all. Don't even like to preach on it. But that's what the lectionary throws to us today. And as Nedra was reading it, I was thinking on a more light-hearted vein about the houses being divided. They will be divided, father against son and son against father. My son John, I think if you wanted to paint a picture of the perfect son, you would pick my son, John. We haven't always had a close relationship, but we do now. But he's always been, I think, the perfect son. But I always wonder how I could raise such a perfect son who is so wrong politically and theologically. And he's 50 years old. And we do. You mention either of those subjects, and we're off to the races in an argument. Son against father, a house divided. But there is always love, no matter how much we argue. And that's kind of the approach I want to take to this scripture this morning, because it is such a tough one to deal with. And as I wrote the sermon out, I wondered if you really even wanted to hear a sermon on this subject this morning, whether you were really ready to listen to the idea that Jesus is just itching to bring fire and even division to the earth that his Father created. I'm just not comfortable with that idea of Jesus wanting to set us all ablaze, the creation all ablaze. I am not comfortable with the idea that he wants to see us all divided and fighting among ourselves. I just don't believe that. But, be that as it may, I preach from the lectionary, which means a series of scriptures that are assigned over a 3-year period that many of the Protestant denominations and the Catholics as well adhere to. So I'll do it. Maybe we can figure out a way out of it. Maybe we can figure out, maybe Jesus is trying to tell us what is his mission. And peace, if you read this scripture, doesn't seem to be a part of that deal that we talk about with Jesus. And when John talks, John doesn't seem to talk about peace either at first. You know, John was an interesting character. He was trained as an interim pastor, and work for him as well as for other interims is just never done. As soon as he completed his assignment in one congregation and they had called a new pastor, he moves on to another and he starts all over again. And some of the churches that John served were pretty healthy, while others were not well at all. And it didn't matter to John. In either case, though his tactics would differ one from the other, he came not to bring peace, but division and fire. Sometimes, even though he knew in his heart this was what he was called to do, it had to tear him apart. And oftentimes, interim ministers are required to bring that fire and that division, to shake the people up, to get them ready for a new full-time pastor where they can move on. And the most difficult situations for John were when he went to a church that was in good shape. On the surface, on those churches, everything always looks smooth. Everybody seems to get along. So it seems on the surface. What he always seemed to find was that peace always looked good because the congregation wasn't willing to be honest with themselves and with each other. Peace at any cost seemed to be their motto of their congregation. Never were the sickly and the sometimes embarrassing denominational or congregational or societal issues that are mentioned in polite company. They don't mention those because they don't want to offend anybody. Controllers of the church, and we all know about them. There are always controllers in churches. And they were tolerated in the early churches, and they were even elevated to the board or to the elder status in the hopes that they would see what reasonable and thoughtful people and other leaders would then stop in their contrary ways. Don't trouble the waters, people always said. Don't stir up things. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Don't change what we're doing, how we're worshiping, what we're worshiping, or what we're saying. Let's just keep everybody happy. What a sad, sad mission statement for any church. Then in those churches, there were controllers who specialized in gatekeeping. They were usually long-term members who probably had joined the church before God. And they knew better than anybody else who should fit in and who shouldn't fit in. And they were usually beloved by the rest of the congregation. They're the old-timers, they're the gurus. And they took their role as gatekeepers very seriously. Whenever somebody came to church who was deemed unworthy, different, other, because of their age, their race, their clothes, or their sexual orientation, showed up on a Sunday morning, these gatekeepers would make certain that that person who came who was different would learn in soft, but probably no uncertain terms, that the church down the road would probably be better for them and would suit them better than this church. And it was always done in such a way as not to present the idea that they were getting the bum's rush. If you ask John, he would tell you that his job was to be a truth teller. And that's what our ordination as pastors, as ministers, as preachers, and the disciple of Christ is all about. We are ordained to be truth tellers, no matter what the cost. And it was up to John, and it is up to any other preacher, pastor, who accepts that calling, to not be dishonest, not to avoid the deeper issues of their common life. And so even if John wouldn't say that he came to bring fire. At least not out loud, he didn't say it. He would admit that he came to bring light. And while he would readily tell you he didn't come to bring peace, he did plan to show them where the dividing lines were, even though they weren't discussed, as I said, in polite circles. And so maybe that's what this passage talks about when it talks about maybe I bring fire. You think I came to bring peace? No. Came to bring the truth. And sometimes the truth hurts. Sometimes we don't all agree on what is truth. And most congregations didn't like John very much at all. His reputation always preceded him, and often the congregational leaders would balk at the suggestions that he gave, but he was only their interim, and he would be gone after a while. And the congregants would say, why not bring somebody who will come along and help us to get on an even keel? Will tell us what we want to hear, not necessarily what we need to hear. The churches just didn't like John very much because he said he was a truth teller. But in time, they came to see the wisdom of his ways. They saw that his way was much more a way of peace than it had originally seemed. You know, divisions in churches, divisions in families are never really very pleasant, are they? And they're usually not sought. We don't want them. They just seem to happen. Yet before true peace can be obtained, congregational members need to be aware. They need to recognize. They need to admit that there are divisions within us as members of a congregation. There is a difference of understanding between those of us who come to this small church each Sunday. For instance, as long as the issue of ordaining homosexual men and women is kept out of the discussion, some people might just think that everybody holds the same opinion that they do. We had a regional meeting of our church not too many years ago in which that issue was slated to be discussed. There were a block of our churches and the disciples of Christ who said, if you even talk about that, we're leaving. We're no longer going to be disciples. No reason, they said, to even talk about it. Talk about a good way to keep a house divided. Just don't talk about the issues as if the division will go away. Another example in church and in society is the pro-choice or pro-life issue. There are some say they are pro-life, and they won't listen to any other discussion, and they don't allow it to be discussed in their congregation. And I always wonder about people like that when they say so adamantly they are pro-life. Are they really? Are they really? I wonder if they oppose the death penalty. Most of them I've talked to are in favor of the death penalty and yet claim to be pro-life. can't be done, my friends. There is nothing wrong with being anti-abortion and anti-death penalty. There is nothing wrong with being anti-abortion and pro-death penalty. The point is, you can't be pro-life if you want to save babies' lives and kill adults. That makes no sense at all. So you have to be what you are. And those same people, by and large, don't seem to want to help the baby after it's born. We have all kinds of poverty in this country. Much of it, or some of it, is caused by having to raise children where there is no mother, there is no father, or whatever. And people raise Cain about having to pay taxes to support the welfare people. You see, what it's about is learning to live. I am not proposing one concept or another for you to believe. I'm just putting them out there where you can question them in your own mind. You see, it's perfectly all right to take either position that you want, but be firm about what you do. But at the same time, give someone else the right to have a different opinion. Give someone else a right to express their opinion. You don't have to accept it, but you should listen to them as they should listen to you. You see, if we discussed those things that divide us so sharply, we might just come to find out how really close we are as Christians. What often is missing when we avoid those troublesome conversations is that we don't learn how to respectfully disagree with someone else. We don't learn how to sit still and to make sure we understand what the other person's position is. If you want a test of that, just watch some of these television news shows where they have a panel and they're trying to discuss an issue. I don't know about you, but I can't hear a word that's said because they're all talking over each other. They're not learning how to sit and listen and respect what the other person says and then come to their own decision and be able to say that. John saw his role and he talked about it. I have to bring fire. I didn't come to bring peace. He would point the hot button issues out to the members of his congregation. He would help them to understand, but more importantly than that, he would give them a safe haven, a place where they could talk about those divisions in a respectful way. He kept their feet on the fire until all of the positions were understood. While some of the divisions were more than even John could overcome, most of the time people found, and we find, we are closer together than we ever thought, despite our differences. The pastor tells of attending a moving event where there were about 3,000 people in attendance. They were people from every Christian faith imaginable. And they met to recommit themselves and their churches to one issue, and that of the work of justice. And in that room, over a period of days at this particular revival, they knew if they cared to bring it up, they could find huge differences among each one of them in theology, as well as differences in moral issues. And they all knew that these differences were there. But for the time being, at least, they put them aside so they could get about doing their work, the work of doing justice together. They never denied that they had any differences. They never denied what they were. They didn't deny that it didn't matter. They knew they mattered. But they said the only difference in this gathering of 3,000 people that mattered was the difference that they could make together if they didn't sweat the small stuff. There are many social and moral issues to discuss in our society today. And some, I think, are worthy of discussion in sermons. However, over the past, I have chosen not to, only because I believe that for now, anyway, it's important for us as a congregation to work together on projects, to work together on ministries and issues that bring us together rather than those that tend to divide us. I am giving consideration to beginning a new class discussion for the whole community, which will discuss current issues in society and Christianity today. I hope it will be open to people of all faiths and no faiths, to enable people to come and talk about current events, current issues, and what do they mean as a matter of faith, to raise questions, to learn together, and to question in their own mind what they believe. And in our current services, I hope we experience a time of peace, and that the issues that divide us don't matter as much as the work that God has given us to do together. It is my hope we learn to bash our swords into plowshares, to put down our weapons of words, to hold hands together, to walk around to those parts of the community and those parts of the world that know nothing but devastating war and hunger, poverty, division, anger, and hatred. When we do that, we are a people of justice. We are a people of peace. When we stop looking for what it is that divides us, and instead strive to that unites us in Jesus Christ, we are people of peace and justice. If we are, as followers of Jesus, also to bring division and fire, let us set fire to the underbrush of hatred, the underbrush of mistrust and prejudice, and let us be together a people of peace and justice. In Christ's name, amen.